All right. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming. I know most of you, but not everybody. I'm James Howell. I'm one of the pastors here. This is Rabbi Murray Ezring. He's not one of the pastors here, although he's here a lot, and it feels kind of like he is. He is at Temple Israel here in Charlotte, and we've done quite a number of these programs together, and it's always great fun. And tonight, we have come to talk about the Sabbath in Judaism and Christianity. I told Lisa, who couldn't be here tonight, I told her, I said, Murray gets the heavy lifting tonight because Jews have a huge edge over us on this thing. So I'm going to start by saying just a few Christian things about the Sabbath, and then turn it over to Murray, and we'll talk some, and then you can ask us questions. We'll interact some, which will be great fun. Interestingly, today we hosted a clergy conference. We had several hundred clergy from all over North Carolina who were here in the building. And our worship service in the sanctuary featured the preaching of Claude Alexander, who is from the Park Church here in Charlotte. And lo and behold, he talked about Sabbath for Christians. It was just one of the finest sermons that I've ever heard. And he talked about how we're not defined by what we do. We're not defined as producers, as consumers, that we just are. That who you are is a beautiful thing in God's sight. And the practice of Sabbath enables us to rest. Most of us, we just work so hard. We got that Protestant work ethic. It was really a powerful sermon. And I thought about some things I've gotten to do with respect to Sabbath for whatever reason over the last several years. I sometimes write book reviews for a magazine called The Christian Century. And they've asked me to review two different books on the Sabbath over several years. I don't know if they remember that I'd done the other book. And they're lovely books, and on your table, you don't have to take this. It's just there if you like this kind of thing. Copies of my reviews of these two books. One is by a guy named Christopher Ringwald, and what he does is he talks about that there's a holy day for Jews, there's a holy day for Christians, and there's a holy day for Muslims as well. And he tries to reflect on what that means for all three of those traditions, and it is just a lovely, eloquent book. He uses all these wonderful phrases like, for many Christians, the Sabbath is the dessert that they leave on the table and don't get to. He talks about it as being a banquet of time. He talks about he's a Christian. He befriends a family that's Jewish, and he learns what they do on their Sabbath day, like they don't drive the car, they don't cook, they don't whatever. And at first he thinks, this is just crazy. How can we ever do this? And so his family engages in this for a while, and they discover all kinds of wonderful things about themselves and about their neighbors and everything else. And the phrase he uses to categorize this, he says, once again, the Christians are saved by the Jews. I mean, I love that phrase. Once again, the Christians are saved by the Jews. He talks about a lot of things that are just absolutely wonderful. And then I reviewed a book by a guy named Walter Brueggemann, who's a Christian scholar. He's just retired, but one of our best published, best known Old Testament scholars. And he wrote a book on the Sabbath that's really very different. He doesn't think about it so much as a kind of a devotional practice on your part so that you might grow and be close to God. He talks about the socioeconomics of it, that if you read the Sabbath commandment, it doesn't just say, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy, don't do anything. But it talks about don't let the servants work, don't let your cattle work. So what he says is the Sabbath service is actually a revolutionary thing in terms of economics and politics and culture. If you think about it, in our culture, you're defined by your productivity, you're defined by producing. Everything is this engine of activity, and for you to step out of that is actually countercultural. It's sort of revolutionary to step back from that. So I read these two reviews. I thought some about just Jesus and the Sabbath. Jesus has these conflicts where he does something like he heals someone on the Sabbath. And, some Jewish teacher takes exception to that. And Jesus rather famously says the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. That's one of those things that we could interpret and think about for a while. Our church last year, if you were around and remember this, we did this series called Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, which was really important. That's been a real signature piece for a lot of us. A key part of emotionally healthy spirituality is like you rest. You don't drive yourself to overfunction all the time. And that when you rest, you get in touch with this deeper part of yourself and you actually rest because you're tired. I talk to people all the time and I say, tell me one emotion that describes how you feel. People very often say, I am exhausted. there aren't too many people, over-energized people. People are just exhausted. There's a kind of weariness out there. This whole business of having a day that's sacred. Somebody said, if no day is sacred, then no day is sacred, right? If no time is sacred, then no time is sacred. I've talked some in sermons in recent years about the whole business of the gadgets that we carry around. Some of you, I noticed, as you were waiting, you were on your phones. Some of you... People are they think they're really skilled at this. Like sometimes I'm preaching and people, they think, he doesn't notice that I am on my phone, kind of doing this number, but I see you out there. And what that is, we're just addicted to these things, right? Because we must always be available. I mean, if I've got a text, I can't wait 30 minutes to answer it. We just have this addiction that makes absolutely no sense at all. And the phrase that I like to use is, if we're always available, then we're never available. And that's to other people, and that's to God as well. So what would it be like? We actually did an experiment here a few years ago. I asked people during the month of October to take Sunday and do nothing. This is a real challenge. Some people reported back like, that was great. I took a nap on the hammock and we met neighbors that we didn't. Some people said this. And I remember one guy that some of you would know, very earnest guy. And I preached on this thing. He's always trying to do what challenges that I lay out there. So he came to you after the service. He said, okay, the Sabbath thing, so I want to do that. So if I go home and if I don't drive and if I don't cook and I don't work, then what do I do? It was a great question, right? What you don't do is okay not to do. And so that was absolutely fascinating. I'm going to turn. One of the things that was cool in November is we did and some of you were with us, we did a Jewish Christian trip to the Holy Land, which I'd never done before. And that was absolutely lovely. I saw things that I'd never seen before. I saw things I'd seen before in a different light. But one of the real highlights was that we were there on the Sabbath. We were there on Shabbat. And that was just really interesting to be introduced to what that's like. In the hotel, the elevators they stop on every floor because you're not pushing buttons, right? You have to just deal with it, right? And just a lot of things. And it was really a special day for those of us that were there. And anyhow, it seems to me that Jews have traditionally had the corner on Sabbath. But it should be a big thing for Christians. It has been throughout history. John Wesley, the founder of Methodism, was very big on Sabbath observance. And in fact, if he caught you doing things on Sabbath, he would, you couldn't have communion the next Sunday. He was hard on that. And it seems the kind of thing that could be really liberating for us. And I think once again, we can think of the Christians being saved by the Jews. So we want to hear from Murray and perhaps learn from some practices or lack of practice, and learn how to have maybe a more joyful sense of all of our time, not just Sabbath. So, Murray.
This may have been the first interfaith trip that Dr. Howell has been on, but he did tell me when we got back to the States it won't be the last.
Absolutely.
So watch your mailings, and you never know. You may be able to join us for exciting adventures in our ancestral homelands. Where do I begin? In the Bible, we are told on the seventh day, Shabbat vayinafash, God stopped and did something with his soul, or her soul, or its soul. What does that mean? We don't really know, but traditionally, if you look in Genesis, you'll see it's usually translated ceased from all of God's work and rested. Whatever that means. Probably really means God breathed. Vayinafash, which is the same word as soul. So the Sabbath isn't not working. It's a little bit more enigmatic than that in the Bible. But we celebrate the Sabbath through a series of rituals. Rituals to Jews are not burdensome, but instead define our time. So, Is there anyone here who has ever courted someone they loved? No? Boy, Methodists are different than Jews. Okay, raise those hands high. All right, is there any guy here who has ever prepared a dinner for the girl he was courting before they were married? Right on time, Parker. I'm sorry, that's a running joke from our trip in November. Good to see you. When you were preparing your dinner, what was the first thought that came into your mind about what you were going to cook? Oh, come on, guys, you can remember. I can tell you that the first time I invited Barbara over to my apartment for dinner, I was going to cook a stuffed veal breast, stuffed with rice made with onions and all kinds of other herbs, and asparagus, my favorite vegetable, and then the appetizers and the desserts were the realm of my roommates. But we also had candles on the table. We had flowers around the room. We had a nice couple of bottles of wine, right? Does that sound familiar to anyone? I know, oh, wait a second. Methodists can't admit to drinking wine, right? At least so I was told earlier this evening. That's a romantic dinner, right? The minute you walk in the apartment or the house, you can smell the aroma of a delicious meal. The candlelight just sparkles, especially after you dim the lights a little bit. And the wine warms you up and helps you feel a little bit freer about expressing the feelings you have for each other. Every Friday night, every Shabbat, we Jews begin Shabbat with a very romantic dinner. Historically, Jews couldn't afford to buy food all week long. The men, the working men in the families, would fast 2 to 3 days a week just to have enough money to buy something special, whether it was fish or chicken or just about anything that they couldn't normally afford to put on the table. So when they would come home from services, there would be something special to eat, and you could smell the aroma. And of course, on your tables, you have challah bread. Challah doesn't really mean egg twist bread, although that's the definition for most people in America. Challah actually means that the bread is kosher and that before it's baked, a minimum of an olive's sized ball has been taken off of the dough. It is put in the oven with the rest of the bread, and when the bread is taken out, that ball is left in to burn. It's a sacrifice, and we still do that. And the blessing that we say when we do that is, "Praised are you, O Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who sanctified us with commandments and commanded us to take the challah." But the bread that's left, which is reminiscent of the showbread from the temple days, is called challah today. But on Friday evenings, we start our ritual evening with 3 things. Barbara, do you want to do this? No, okay, I didn't think so. Told you she wouldn't, Melanie. So the first thing we do is to light the Sabbath candles. And the blessing that we recite is done in a mystical way. It's a Kabbalistic tradition that we close our eyes and we cover. Why doesn't everyone stand up? I'm going to teach you how to welcome the Shabbat, the Sabbath. So you close your eyes, you take your hands before your eyes, and as we say this blessing, and I'm going to say it first in Hebrew and then in English, we take our hands and 3 times we bring the aroma of the candle and the smoke towards us, and we say, "Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Shabbat. Praised, O you, O Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who sanctifies us with commandments and commanded us to light the Sabbath lights." And then we move our hands away, we see the light, and we see this brightness that we have removed from ourselves when the candle was first lit. So that there's a special warmth and brightness to Shabbat. Yeah, just pull it to you. But you have to realize you really are pulling this to you. It's not just an action. And then we welcome the Sabbath with real wine. This is the kind of wine that can be served here. And the blessing for the wine is actually a long blessing, and I'm going to recite it for you and then tell you what it's about. And we do this standing also. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, borei pri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'ratzavanu, v'shabbat kodsho b'ahava uvratzon, hinchilanu, zikaron lema'aseh v'reshit, ki hu yom techila lemikra'e kodesh, zecher litziat Mitzrayim, kivanu v'charta, v'yotanu kidashta, mikol ha'amim, v'shabbat kodshecha, v'ahava uvratzon, hinchaltanu, baruch atah Adonai, mikadesh ha-shabbat. And do you think this is the first time the Kiddush has been recited here? Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shehecheyanu, v'kiyamanu, v'higianu la'azman hazeh. Have a seat, everyone. What the Kiddush says, it starts with this line: Praised are you, O Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who has created the fruit of the vine. Obviously, God created the vines from which the grapes and wine come. And then the long paragraph reminds us that we observe the Sabbath for two reasons. Can anyone guess what those two reasons are? Yes, sir. It is a commandment, but there's actually a practical reason, two practical reasons to remember the Sabbath day. All right, anyone here ever given birth to a child? Do you remember what that was like? After all the struggle and difficulty, you hold that beautiful baby in your arms, right? And wow, I've just created life. By the way, ladies, you may not believe this, my wife will tell you, I envy you the ability to create life. That makes you far more godlike than men. The first thing that the Sabbath reminds us of is creation. That we were created by God with a purpose, not by accident. The second thing that it reminds us of is the Exodus from Egypt. That Israel as a people were created with a purpose. Because it's after the Exodus from Egypt that the nation of Israel comes to be. The covenant at Mount Sinai is our constitution. And all of that is wrapped up together in Shabbat. And we have to remember that. And we're going to come back to that in just a moment because that is the real essence of Shabbat. But we have the challah, and in Jewish homes, and when we say the blessing over the candles and over the wine, the challah is covered. You want to know why? No one wants to know why. Come on, aren't you? Oh, that's much better, thank you. The reason is, according to Midrash, because the challah is the last thing we do. We don't want it to be jealous of what it sees us doing with the candles and the wine. And therefore, we keep it covered like this until it's time to say the blessing over the challah bread, and we uncover it. It doesn't know anything's happened. And all of a sudden, the challah is the center of attention. And what does every one of us, especially our children, hope for? to be the center of attention, to be loved and respected just for who they are. And then we say the blessing, and if someone at each table would pick up their challah, there should be one at each table, right? The blessing we say is this. And traditionally we'll put a little salt on it. Anyone know why salt? What's so special about salt? Salt was more precious than gold in the ancient Middle East. A pound of gold couldn't buy you a pound of salt. Pound and a half might, but salt was more precious. So we pour a little salt on to remember the richness and joy of life. And we say, Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. And generally in traditional homes, you tear off a piece and then pass the challah around for others to have a piece. Because we don't use knives, which are an instrument of war. So tear off a piece of challah, enjoy. Now, if I told you that the blessing I just recited was a lie, would you believe me? You would. You're really gullible. No, Alan, you are correct. It's not true. The blessing we just recited said, "Praised are you, Lord, ruler of the universe, who brought forth bread from the earth." Now, I don't know about you, but I have yet to see a field which grows loaves of bread. Anyone ever seen that? God doesn't make bread, right? Who does? We do. Human beings. How many of you have baked bread at home? How many of you have baked a good cornbread at home? I'd like the recipe, please. My cornbread isn't very good, but I'm working on it. It takes a human being to make bread. And that teaches us something very important that we have to remember on Shabbat. And that is, we are God's partners in creation. God did not create a complete, perfect human being. God did not create a complete, perfect world. We have to continually work as God's partners to make the world better. So little things like, let's see, you guys do mission trips, right? Is God hammering those nails? Is God bringing the water to the villages? You are. But you are there working as God's hands and God's feet. And that's a very important religious term or concept within Judaism. So when we talk about Shabbat, Shabbat is not just a day of rest. We as Jews do not sanctify place or space. We sanctify time. The reason is, time is the only important commodity in our existence. We don't want to live for an hour, do we? Is there anyone here who would be happy to live just for one more hour? Anyone like another year instead? How about a decade? Okay? Time is important. It's how we measure our lives. And so we have to make the right use of time. Remember what I said about that dating meal? You can look at Shabbat. Well, sorry, my artistic abilities are limited, as you can see. So, if we consider that we're starting Shabbat here, if you had needed to use one word to define what we're supposed to feel on Friday evenings, does anyone know what that word would be? You must have a word somewhere. No one? What's important about Sabbath? Rest. That's not the word. How about another one? Tired. That's definitely not the word. Excited. Very good. Now, excited would be a very good word there. Friday evening is an evening of excitement. And the word that best describes it is this. Can everyone read that? Did I spell it right? Sensuality. Yeah, sensuality. Does that bring anything to mind? Don't blush when you think of that. Does it bring anything else to mind? Beauty. What sense are you using when you think of beauty? Your eyes. Any other senses that you know of? Taste. So you taste your food and enjoy it, right? What's another sense you have? Hearing. Very good. We have two of these things, right? So when we hear the voices around us and we hear words of praise to God, that's another sense. How about another one? Touch. Not yet. But yes, touch. We feel things. And it's very important to have a good tactile sense so that you know what you're touching, right? Have you ever seen one of those nail boards in a museum that they tell you to put your hand on it and press? And sure. I get scared every time I do that, even though I know that as soon as I press, those nails are going to move back. But I know that nails are dangerous to me. If I see a board and I try to push the nail out like that, it's going to go through my hand. Not good. So when we talk about sensuality, we mean all of our senses. But you were also on the right track, okay? Because the sensuality part of Shabbat is so important that when I was a teenager, we used to love to remind our parents that making love on Friday night is a double mitzvah. You get 2 credit points for it. Okay? Whoa! As a teenager, it was really exciting. Nowhere near what it was later in life. But so this whole sense of sensuality and physical enjoyment is very important Erev Shabbat. It's a time, the beginning of Shabbat is when we focus on us. Our physical needs, whether it be food or hearing a loving word or touching something that is beautiful or seeing something that is beautiful. And the whole evening of Erev Shabbat Friday night, it's all about sensuality. And then you go to sleep. And then something happens. What happens after you go to sleep? You dream. And if you've had good food and you've had a good evening and enjoyed your company with each other, you'll have pleasant dreams, right? Hopefully. What happens next? What happens next? You wake up. It's the morning. Oh my goodness. Well, all that sensuality stuff, all that smelling and touching and hearing and singing and everything, it's gone. Because Saturday morning, the focus of Shabbat is on Torah study. And that's why we go to services on Saturday morning. The major bulk of our service is reading the Torah and readings from the prophet, so that we are focusing on learning Torah and understanding it. Why is that so important to understand the Bible? You know what? I'm giving up on the adults. How about you? What's so important about studying the Bible?
You get to know more about God.
You get closer to God. You understand more about God, about our relationship with God, about how we're supposed to live. Very good. What was your name? Richard. Give him double credit for tonight. That was a good answer. So that's what Saturday morning is about, getting closer to God, saying some prayers, being in a community that's singing together. And we do sing together. That's the essence of Jewish service. From the beginning of our morning prayer till we get to the reading of the Torah, we are singing together. From the time we finish reading the prophets till the time the service is over, we are singing together. And then we go in for our repast together. We have a light lunch, and we're supposed to sing together. We sing the grace after meals. We sing songs. Wonderful, exciting songs. Mipiel, Yivarach, Yisrael. And you'll hear hand clapping and pounding on the tables. And if you're really lucky, you'll see people dancing because we've come closer to God. But then something else happens. And we come down the other side. What's the problem on the other side of this mountain? We're leaving Shabbat behind. It's going away. We're back to the normal world. And is there anyone here who has anything at all they're afraid of? Anything that keeps you up at night? Mothers, besides your children, is there anything that keeps you up at night? Is there anything you worry about? That's coming back, your greatest fears. There's a Talmudic story that the greatest fear of the Jews of Jerusalem was that in the southern valley, they would offer sacrifices of their children as soon as Shabbat ended. And the Jews who lived in Jerusalem would be forced to have that aroma burning in their nostrils of burning children, sacrificed to pagan gods. And so we developed a ceremony called Havdalah, which means separation. Now, can anyone remember how do we start Shabbat? Candles? Wine? Bread? The fragrance of a good meal, right? When we conclude Shabbat, we use a multi-wicked candle. We use a container of spices. And we use a cup of wine. The wine is to allow us to feel the warmth of Shabbat as it ends and hope that it remains with us at least through Tuesday. The fragrant spices are to smell and hope that the richness of Shabbat's experience of sensuality, of Torah study, of community remain with us at least through Tuesday. And then the candle, so that the light of Shabbat remains with us. But just as we begin with a romantic dinner, we conclude Shabbat, say farewell to it, with the same romantic symbols. Aroma, wine, and candlelight. So that Shabbat is a period of time in which we don't focus on what we do the rest of the week, but we don't rest the whole day. It's not go home and go to sleep. It's go home, dance, sing, enjoy yourselves, go to the synagogue the next day, study Torah, get closer to God, and as the Shabbat wanes, go back to the synagogue so that you can say farewell to your beloved Shabbat in the same way you welcomed it. According to Achad Ha'am, who was he was a philosopher, he was a political scientist, and a poet at the end of the 18th century. Achad Ha'am said, more than the Jews keep the Sabbath has kept the Jews. Can anyone tell me what that means?
It's kept them together as a community of faith.
It forces you together as a community of faith. It forces you to continue to have at least one day a week that you focus, A, on the people you love, and B, on the God you love. Because if you don't have your loving relationship in both directions, physical in this world and spiritually with our Creator, then you can't be a full human being. So it brings it all together into a package. And that, in short, and I do mean in short, even though it sure feels like I've been talking a long time, is the importance of Shabbat to us in one simple spectrum.
I would add that If you're younger than I am, you won't know what I'm talking about, but a few of you are not younger than I am in this room. So I remember when I was a little boy, my grandparents were very devout Baptists, and this Sunday Sabbath observance was a big deal to them. However, it was, I don't want to cast aspersions on my wonderful grandparents, but it became kind of a miserable day, right? So we come home from church, and then you literally couldn't do anything. So you wanted to play, you wanted to have fun, but you're supposed to just sit and be quiet. I don't know if any of you have a memory of this kind of do nothing, can't turn on TV, whatever on the Sabbath. Blue laws came from this. These stores were not closed, were not open on Sundays, and so on. So that was sort of a dour, morose observance that's almost the antithesis of what you're describing here, which is actually the most joyful, pleasant day of the week. But the premise, though, is the not doing the things you do the rest of the week.
Right.
Talk a little more about that. So the Sabbath, just to clarify for people who don't know, Sabbath begins Friday
Sunset.
sundown and runs through Saturday sundown. So that's a little different with the way we mark days. And tell the things you do, don't do. What are the sort of strictures of that?
Is that me?
Yeah, I don't know why it's doing that.
All right. I want to start by telling you what I used to do with my kids on Saturday afternoon. We would come home from services, we'd have lunch if we didn't eat lunch at the synagogue, and then my kids, napping was a curse word in my house. So none of my 4 kids liked to nap. And so Barbara needed a rest, so I would play games with the kids for most of the afternoon. And we played things like Chutes and Ladders, Monopoly, Sorry. I taught them how to play poker and blackjack. And we used to use chips. And if they were ever able to beat me, they would get a treat at the end of Shabbat, which happened all the time. And what made that special for me is, as you can imagine, my schedule, like James's, takes us away from our families most of the time. My wife will tell you that she raised our children as a single mother, even though we were married living in the same home. My children will tell you that I was never around when they needed me or wanted me, because I was always helping someone else. That I have a good relationship with my children, I am convinced, centers around that fact that I spent Shabbat with them. And in the summer months when we lived in Florida, we would go in the backyard and spend most of the afternoon in the pool. It was spending time together. So when you think of Shabbat, rather than thinking of the strictures, think of the freedom that those strictures give you. So someone wants to talk to me about a personal problem. On Shabbat, they're going to have a problem because I don't usually answer my phone. I ignore it. And today, with modern technology, it's really nice because I know who's calling. If there's a true emergency, if someone is dying, or I will respond. But in general, it's my time. So it's not a question of not driving. It's not a question of not working, not writing. I don't write on Shabbat. I don't write sermons on Shabbat. I don't even read material for sermons on Shabbat. It's a time where my focus changes completely. And that's the essence of Shabbat. I could go through a whole list of things, the things you don't do. When Barbara and I were first married, we never had a television on Shabbat. And then 1973 occurred. Anyone know what was important about Yom Kippur 1973? Israel lost a war to the Arabs, and thank God the Arabs didn't know it. This is the truth. The Arabs did not realize they had beaten Israel at warfare, and they stopped. And because they stopped, Israel was able to recoup and push the invading armies out of Israel again. And I went to services on Yom Kippur morning in 1973, and there were murmurings about a war somewhere. And I had to stop and ask a member of the congregation I was working for at the time, what's going on? He said, you don't know. You're a rabbinical student. You should know. I said, what should I know? Israel's at war, and Syria has basically cut Israel in half. Whoa. So we now make an accommodation. There, 24 hours a day, every day of the week, there's a television on in my home so that I never go to the synagogue again without knowing what's going on in the world. Because too often there are things I need to know and be able to respond to. So that's a change. And that, my rabbinic colleagues to my right would say is breaking Shabbat, and my rabbinic colleagues to the left would tell me, your whole existence will be enriched. Because we need that day. We need that day that is, ooh, you've got these wonderful bracelets over here. Live differently. Yeah, who's wearing one? You should all be wearing one. Live differently. I'm sure that that logo is for the whole week. But definitely, you need to find some time to live differently and get the stresses and strains of the world out of your life for 24 hours. For Jews, by the way, it's 25 hours. We actually begin the Shabbat 18 minutes before Sunday on Friday and conclude 42 minutes after sunset for a 25-hour day, so that we're very slow to get rid of Shabbat. But it's so important. When was the last time you sat with your family and really talked about something from the Bible? Or really talked about modern issues from a Christian perspective? And I don't mean necessarily Dr. Howell's Christian perspective, your Christian perspective. As I've told you, I like to interpret the Torah and the rest of the Bible my own way. When I have classes in Bible the first year, we don't study with commentary. I want to try to find what everyone in the class thinks is being told to us. And then we come back the second year with 1 or 2 commentaries, and then 3 or 4 more the third year. So it's always different. But religion isn't meant to limit us. Religion is meant to free us and give us strength to be who we were meant to be. Yes, sir.
I think we Christians use two words, temple and synagogue, interchangeably because we don't really, speaking for me, what is the current definition? What's the difference between the two? Synagogue?
Nothing. Okay. Temple, synagogue, shul, they're all the same. However, Melanie and Parker and James and Sally, is there anyone else here tonight who was with us? We went to the temple. We walked up the southern steps of the temple, same temple that my ancestors used to walk up to take their sacrifices into the temple. The same steps that James informed me Jesus walked up to go into the temple courtyard. Those same steps that were so important. That is the temple. And if you say the temple, you don't even have to use the Hebrew words Beit HaMikdash. Every Jew knows you're talking about. What was that?
Unless you live in Atlanta.
Unless you live in Atlanta.
There's a Reformed temple.
Well, the temple, yeah.
It's called the temple.
And it is very well known because it was bombed in the 60s. But anywhere but Atlanta, the temple is the Temple of Solomon, or the second temple that stood at the same place. So they're used interchangeably. Yes, anything else? Anyone know what a synagogue is for? What's the purpose of a church? James? What's the purpose of a church? I'll ask you. You know as well as he does, right? Place of worship. See, a synagogue has 3 definitions. It's a Beit HaMikdash, a place, or Beit Tefillah, a place of prayer. It is a Beit Knesset, a place to socialize. And it is a Beit Midrash, a place to study. all three different meanings, all three expressed in different ways. So when you go to a temple dance, you are not going to study Torah. If you go to study Torah, you're not going to be having a good time with other young people or older people dancing your heart out. But you will enjoy the study of Torah. So all three of these different definitions, which go back to the days of Jesus, by the way, are real definitions of what a temple is for, a synagogue. So a synagogue is much more than a place of worship for us. It's a center of our life. But our religion is centered in our home. Yes?
This is a serious question, but in your service, do you ever get amens from the congregation?
Yeah, I do actually.
It's
You
a
know,
Hebrew word.
Every so often. But every prayer, every Baruch Atah Adonai prayer ends with the congregation saying Amen.
Amen.
But the reason I enjoy speaking in African American churches is, unlike synagogues and unlike Methodist churches that I've been in on Sunday morning speaking, they let you know what they're thinking and whether they like what you're saying or not. And boy, is that energizing to a speaker.
Well, here, I should clarify, Murray. I mean, here they let me know. It's just a little different. Like if I say something really good, they go, kind of like that. Can spot it. It's nonverbal.
What happens if you say something they don't want to know?
Yeah.
See, and in our Kiddush after services, our repast after services, every member of the congregation has to come over to me to tell me, oh, that was a wonderful sermon, or that was the worst sermon you've ever given, or last week I thought was the worst sermon you've ever given, but this one's worse. And I hear from virtually everyone every week. So I got to tell you, it's great for the ego. You know, hopefully, more often than not, more people say they liked it, but you never know. So our congregation is quiet during services. If everyone's snoring, you know you're in trouble.
It's a bad sign.
But usually when I speak, not too many people can sleep, because if I see people sleeping, I'll raise the volume.
There's the story about the preacher who dreamed that he was preaching, and when he woke up, he was. Never mind.
How long do you usually preach in a service?
15 minutes.
Oh, you're pretty short.
Yeah.
Yeah. I usually do 12 to 15. Sometimes it goes to 20.
See, we do 2.5 hours of worship here on Sunday morning, but it's 4 services.
I just had a school group over, and I was 150 sixth graders. And I said, how long are your services? And he said, 45 minutes, an hour. How long are yours? I said, 2.5 hours. And this one African-American girl raises her hand and says, ours are 4.5 hours long. And I said, boy, can I come? She said, would you want to? Yeah, I would. But it's the most powerful thing for a preacher or a speaker is when people who are listening actually respond in some way that is audible. I love it when they say, preach on, Rabbi. And I do. 5-minute sermon becomes a 25-minute speech. Until they say, enough already. But I will share this. After one talk I gave at a local black church, a woman came over to me and she said, you should be a black preacher. And I said, thank you. She said, no, I really mean it. She said, after that talk, I felt saved when you finished. Because I was done, folks. All right, anyway. It was encouraging, let me tell you. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
How many guests or visitors do you have each Saturday morning? Is it open?
Oh, it varies. We could have 3 or 4. We could have 50, 60. We could have 100. A bar bat mitzvahs, we probably have 100 to 300 guests. Yeah, just yeah. We have lots of people who just come in every Shabbat. I mean, I don't count because I just try to remember everyone's faces so I can go up and talk to them afterwards. But we have a number of people. Always. Except people from this church. I'm a good friend of James's, and I don't want to give anyone any reason to leave. I'm sorry?
We'll say we came from somewhere else.
No, I really cherish the relationship we have with Myers Park United Methodist. I don't know how many of you realize this, but James and I have been doing programs together since he was in Davidson, and I would guess it's probably for the last 18 years or so already. And I always walk away feeling rewarded and excited and energized. And I know that people at the synagogue love to come and hear us here or at the synagogue. It's not that common to have Christian and Jewish spiritual leaders as open and friendly as we are. I was once asked, how can you give a talk like this with Dr. Howell? And I said, why? I said, well, you guys just disagreed on everything. I said, okay, but we never raised our voices to each other. We never had a personal disagreement. We're trying to explain the differences in our religious outlooks. I would wager that if I turned to the 5 confirmation students over here and I asked them a serious religious question, that I would get 5 different answers from them, and no one would get upset with the other for having a different opinion. And reality is, most religions teach the same thing. It's the theology which is a little different, and the rituals which are a little different. But do you guys do good deeds? Is that an important part of your life? So do we. And do you believe in treating each other with kindness? Do you guys believe treating each other with kindness? You never speak gossip about other kids, right?
No.
Okay.
Never.
How about you guys over there? Do you like gossiping? How many adults love to gossip? Everyone does it.
They're not honest. They're not honest.
Everyone does it. It's a terrible thing to do, but when you feel bad about having done it, that's good. Maybe it's even better than not gossiping at all.
And I'd add that this ability to disagree is really revolutionary in our world. I mean, if you watch what's going on politically, there's just rancor and anger, and the other person must be a total nincompoop or worse. And so to be able to disagree is important. And to me, it's not just kind of letting disagreement stand, but what I always love is, like, what can we learn from the person who disagrees? So my reading habits for years have been, I don't want to read books that already think what I think. They're boring. I already think what I think. So I want to read books that think something different from what I think, that I can learn from, that can challenge me, that can stimulate thought. So in this, we may disagree on any number of things, but I have grown a lot in my Christian faith because of my friendship with this rabbi, right? And hopefully tonight, we've had an opportunity to grow in our Christian faith because of thinking about the Sabbath. Here, I think it's not so much that we disagree about the Sabbath, but rather that Christians have sort of allowed themselves to have a less focused, less attentive day.
Yeah, I think the Sabbath.
And we've suffered from that.
I think the Sabbath has a different meaning to Christians today than it does to traditional Jews. But I would like to give everyone homework. I've never done that here before.
That's good.
Can I give you homework? Will you do it? Okay. Between tonight and next Sunday, sit with your family and try to come up with one thing that you could do at home to try to create some kind of a ritual this coming Sunday that will help give meaning to your lives. And do the same thing each of the next 4 weeks. One thing. And you get to decide what it is. I'm not going to tell you. And I'm going to ask James not to tell you.
I think the essential difference between the Jewish view of the Sabbath and described with your grandparents, that you weren't supposed to have any joy in it. It was just suffer through it. And you have great joy in celebrating God's love and the love of the family. And that didn't come through in our Christian faiths. I think it's more so now, but you had the answer.
And in closing, I'm going to add a second assignment, is when you come to church Sunday, during the sermon, say, Amen.
To something you agree with in
Because-
what he says.
No, Parker will be preaching. Watch Parker blush when you do this. Thank you all so much for coming tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.